Hello and welcome to the Estonian Model United Nations 2022 interview series, where we delve into many different topics with our experts to help you understand the issues and the people behind many of the solutions that the international community can offer. And today we are joined by Kärt Juhasoo, who is a representative of the Estonian Ministry of Foreign Affairs dealing with Belarus and Central Asian states, and a very experienced diplomat. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great opportunity to speak to young people in this manner, and I hope that it would be interesting and inspiring.
Thank you. So could you just, in your words, describe your expertise?
At the present moment, I'm working in the political department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. To put it simply, I'm like a crossroads on the issues pertaining Belarus. I'm collecting the information, what's happening at any moment in time. Output is talking points, presentations, speeches for foreign minister, for prime minister, president, when they meet their colleagues of other countries, and on the agenda is the question of Belarus.
And I think that we will continue with the issue of the EU-Belarus border crisis, and I would ask you a couple of questions just to get some insight on the specifics of this issue. Considering the example of the EU-Belarus border crisis and the way that national government is manipulating refugee issue to satisfy their national interests, do you see such practice becoming a new normal, and what should the reaction of the international community be?
It's a very good question. I've been thinking of it since the crisis started or came to our attention. I know that for many experts that the temptation would be to say yes. But I beg to differ. I don't see it in this way. For this moment, today, we could see that the situation is back to more or less normal, and we can tell clearly people that it's on the mend. It's more or less solved, not completely. And everybody here has learned their lessons, including the manipulative governments. I very much hope that their understanding is sufficiently deep that this enterprise failed. I don't think that it's becoming a new normal, in quotation marks, because it's not normal.
Talking about the response to the situation, what do you think was the greatest challenge that national governments and supranational organizations have faced when it comes to the response?
The greatest challenge in this crisis does not differ from the greatest challenges of any crisis of the type where human beings are involved. The greatest challenge for us, for international community, for diplomats, for voluntary helpers like Mondo, is always to find the balance between security concerns and respect for human rights. This formula applies on every crisis, this challenge. Speaking of this current example, what happened in August, September, October, November, December on the border between Poland, Lithuania and Belarus. What we saw was in its extreme, like 1,000 people trying to violently run down the border facilities. Obviously, every state is concerned about who is entering. Since 9/11, in the public consciousness, the threat of terrorism is high. That's why every state wants to screen people through a visa procedure or through asylum application to be familiar with the background, who is entering and what are their intentions. And it's very important that such procedures are done in full respect of human rights and human dignity. In case you have 1,000 angry men running you down, it's very difficult to uphold those norms. You see what I mean? That this is always the biggest challenge, how to treat people with full respect, even in a case when they don't treat you with similar respect.
What would be your viewpoint on the position of women in the EU-Belarus border crisis?
You actually managed to touch one of the key issues in this respect. I firmly believe that the issue of gender equality lays in the bottom of this crisis and every crisis. The inaccessibility of education for girls and women, this empowerment of women, which is endemic, unfortunately, in many cultures in the world, including Europe. Despite our best efforts, we have not achieved equality between genders, not even in EU. In our countries, we are dealing with the issue of pay gap. Women earn much less than men for the same type of jobs. But the gender inequality is more drastic and much worse in countries outside Europe, and that lays in the bottom of every crisis. Coming back to the issue of Belarus, what we saw there were not only men and young men who are naturally more adventurous always. We saw also women with small children following their adventurous husbands, placing themselves and their kids into such position which is unthinkable. And when we ask how come that a woman leaves her home with small children without asking important questions beforehand, is it safe? Is it a good idea that I go and camp in the winter in the wet forest with my small children? Why don't they ask those questions before? In my opinion, it comes from the culture where it's not encouraged of women to think critically, to be independent, to discuss on an equal manner matters and decisions with their husbands, and not to follow them blindly in a situation that puts their own little kids in a harm's way. So you see, it's absolutely clear that the gender issue is here on the very bottom of the thing. The education for girls and women, equality of genders empowerment of women would be at least partially an answer to the problems we face in the world.
I think that you've provided insight into a point that not many people in the Western community consider, perhaps, but the general perception is that people who are coming and participating in this large migratory influx are fleeing from poor food security or lack of health care and many other social benefits, and coming from a very poor background. And there has been a lot of talk on this issue of financing migration. What would be your take on this viewpoint?
I fully share your view that climate change causing crops to fail, causing hunger, certainly is among the biggest problems. World Food Organization is keeping a map of hunger, where you can see in real time changing figures of countries which are hit by massive poverty and suffer in great deal on lack of accessible healthcare and food. According to World Food Organization, 17 countries are in urgent need for food. If we look at the map and where those countries are located, it's quite clear that those people who reached last autumn and winter to Belarus are not those people who are suffering in those countries of acute hunger. I don't know how those people, the sufferers, the most acute sufferers, how they are helped by United Nations or volunteers. This answer I cannot provide, but definitely it's not the only factor, and it's not a factor behind the crisis we are presently discussing, are the events in Belarus on the second half of 2021.
And perhaps coming back to the general sentiment behind the EU-Belarus border crisis, I would like to ask you, what can the international community do to prevent such crises in the future?
Rephrasing your question, what are the lessons we learned? First of all, next time we might be more careful in spotting the early signs. The most effective measure that helped this crisis to come to an end was an active attitude of the European Union Commission, which directly spoke to the governments of the countries of origin and asked them to assist in putting end on this trafficking scheme, which is the term we can apply on this situation. And after that, we saw how the flights stopped or turned over and started transporting the people back to their countries of origin. So the cooperation basically between the EU and the countries which have minority issues or economic issues or general unrest or dissatisfaction of groups of people, and urge them to find a solution. In case of crisis in Belarus, we saw actually people who had similarly like you buy a tourist package to go and spend a week or two in a warm beach. They bought tickets and hotels from tourist companies that were actually providing false information, deceiving people in a great deal, conning them in a blatant and heartless manner. What I'm describing is a crime, yeah? Prevention of crime, spotting early signs that something like that is baking, so to speak, and addressing it. Naming things as the correct name. In the EU, we use a term instrumentalization of migration. It sounds a bit long and clumsy, but it helps us to make a difference between manipulation, criminal activities, trafficking, and in the other hand, people who are really in need, running from gross injustice, political persecution, extreme poverty, disease, or aftermath of a natural disaster. Those are completely different phenomena, and we have to make a clear distinction. This lesson helped us to see early signs in future and apply right preventive measures.
And now perhaps to conclude our discussion, certainly many of the mechanisms that were implemented and many of the concepts that have been developed as a result and throughout this border crisis, to young people, they often seem confusing and maybe even disenchanting, but many are following these issues actively and are taking interest in international security and diplomacy. What would be your message to those young people?
Before I answer this question, could you please, Andrei, be more specific? What is there disenchanting or repulsive, or what's the example? What's in concrete manner you keep in mind in this case?
Well, let's say we have many young people who are reading the news or following some of the biggest stories behind the crisis, and perhaps it is a bit hard for them to follow the diplomatic concepts behind the actions and behind the response. But nevertheless, maybe for them it's an opportunity to take interest or even take action in the future. What would be your opinion on that?
There is such a saying that no crisis should be wasted. It means that there is something to learn from every crisis. I'm not here to say to a particular young person what he or she should take out from this example for themselves. But everything of such a massive scale should provoke an analysis. What is behind this? These facts. What is behind this fact? This. What is behind this fact, behind this fact, behind this? And get down to the root cause. Perhaps I'm too much of a feminist for your liking. But as I said, what I see the root cause of almost every problem is the situation women are living, that they do not participate in politics, in economics. They are sidelined and objectified. I firmly believe that one day when we have a balance of genders, the wars stop, the hunger stop. We'll be able to enjoy a more peaceful and harmonious life everywhere. But Andrei, I don't say that this is an ultimate truth. This is how I see. But every young person could analyze the same facts perhaps differently than me.
I would personally say that you have provided an insight into a very complex and challenging situation, and you have given our viewers a very powerful message to maybe think about and make themselves more active in terms of a more prosperous and sustainable future for all of us, which includes not only conflict resolution, but also solving the root causes behind them and gender equality. So thank you very much for being with us and tackling this challenging topic.
Thank you very much, Andrei. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.